Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentary on the Bible in Bhagavad Gita by J. Donald Walters. This week's reading is Abiding in God. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. Following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Yogananda often emphasized, more often to his disciples than to the general public, but also to everyone generally, for it was a universal teaching, the importance of attunement. For divine understanding cannot be created, it must be received. To the disciples, Yogananda spoke of the importance of attunement with the Guru. To others, he urged the importance at least of attuning oneself to higher consciousness. Can an eagle rise without support from the sustaining air? Jesus Christ said in the Gospel of St. John, chapter 15, I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing. If a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch, and is withered, and men gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. If ye abide in me, and my words abide in you, ye shall ask what ye will, and it will be done unto you. Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit, so shall ye be my disciples. How can we abide in him? Jesus says, if my words abide in you. By words he meant not only his spoken words, but his vibrations, his consciousness, of which the words are only an expression. We must abide by the teachings, but we must also absorb those teachings into ourselves, that they become our own experience. For disciples of this path, the more in their hearts they live consciously in the presence of the Masters, the more they will find the divine presence living within them. And for all true seekers, whether disciples or not, the more they live sustained inwardly by the awareness of God's presence, the higher they will find themselves soaring in wisdom and joy. For the Bhagavad Gita says in the 10th chapter, I am the source of everything. From me, all creation emerges. Blessed with this realization, the wise, awe-stricken, adore me. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Welcome everyone, our friends in virtual land, whether present today or in the future. I don't know who actually did all of this week. Was it Sean? Okay, I suspected it. Anyway, Yamamoto was one of the most advanced disciples of Paramahansa Yogananda, and she hailed from Seattle, where her husband was the dean of the law school at the UW for many years. And she died long ago, 1950, 1949, something like that. Anyway, her book is a treasure, and her birthday is 4th of July. So this was a very perspicacious, wise thing. There's little quotes here from her. And, marvelous soul, and perfect. She found freedom, Yogananda, her guru said, upon her passing. So, perfect coincidence, if you will. Independence Day. Did you ever hear the joke about the Liberty Bell? I did too. It was kind of funny. It was a real crack up. Just wanted to see where you're at. course, you know what the colonists wore when they dumped all that tea in the harbor, right? They wore T-shirts. No, that's not going to be a good day. All right. I've always been a big fan of Mark Twain. I can't think of any other author in American history who both created and expressed at the same time, after all, somewhat the essence of art, the American voice, the American attitude, the American view of life. And I'm not going to go into that, doesn't really fit our topic today. But I am going to do something I rarely do, which is read a little bit. You know, America being founded on individual liberties and so on and so forth, and we're going to have a program at our picnic on Tuesday at the Nanda community. It's about a 45-minute program with quotes from Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. And we feel this year that it's important to affirm the basic principles on which we were founded as a nation. And it just seems the time is right somehow. We don't need to go more into that right here. But how we reconcile the concept of individual liberties with this theme of abiding in God is a very curious one for me. Our age is an age of rising self-respect and individuality, and as a consequence it is also an age of rising egotism. And the antidote for that is really the subject of abiding in God. Now, Mark Twain, has a very tongue-in-cheek voice, which, as I say, seems to reflect much of American humor and so forth. I'm going to read a passage in which he discusses the character of man and disabuses us of what he calls the lie, tongue-in-cheek, of liberty and independence. So bear with me. If you don't have a sense of humor, you just sort of close your eyes and go somewhere. You can abide by a little bit of self-awareness. So he writes, the character of man. Concerning man, he is too large a subject to be treated as a whole, so I will merely discuss a detail or two of him at this time. I desire to contemplate him from this point of view, this premise, that he was not made for any useful purpose, for the reason that he hasn't served any. That he was most likely not even made intentionally, and that his working himself up out of the oyster bed to his present position was probably a matter of surprise and regret to the Creator. There are certain sweet-smelling, sugar-coated lies current in the world which all politic men have apparently tacitly conspired to support and perpetuate. One of these is that there is such a thing in the world as independence. Independence of thought, opinion, and action. And another lie, to wit, that conscience, man's moral medicine chest, is not only created by the Creator, but is put into man ready charged with the right and only true, authentic correctives of conduct, distributed to all nations and all epochs. And then he goes on. We are discreet sheep. We wait to see how the drove is going and then go with the drove. We have two opinions, one private, which we are afraid to express, and another one, the one we use, which we force ourselves to wear to please Mrs. So-and-so, until habit makes us comfortable and custom of defending it makes us love it, adore it, and forget how pitifully we came by it. Look at it in politics. And then he goes on a bit to talk about, in his day, apparently, I didn't know this, and I didn't bother to confirm it, but when you cast your ballot for the president or something, you did not do that in secret. And so if you were a person of influence and so on, everyone knew who you voted for. And so he goes on in a different segue about actual life examples in his life. This is around 1906 or so, during, I think, Teddy Roosevelt's administration, when people who voted for the loser, let's say, or whatever, often lost their jobs, and certainly lost the respect if they were people, in the public and so forth, for having done so. And then he concludes, says, let us skip the other lies for brevity's sake. This passage is anything but brief. To consider them would prove nothing except that man is what he is, loving toward his own, lovable to his own, and otherwise the buzzing, busy, trivial enemy of his race, who tarries his little day, does his little dirt, commends himself to God, and then goes out into the darkness to return no more and send no messages back, selfish even in death. You know, I think about the founding of America, of course, we should be this time of year. And you know, duality being a teaching of the East, that all things must balance, is curious. Because here we had this big explosion into the Revolutionary War, and which, by the way, if you've ever studied the history of that day, you cannot but conclude that it must have been divine grace that made it happen. The number of people who were against it, the few number of people who fought in it, the odds against the British Empire, and so on, was just so overwhelming that there was no practical reason for the founding of America to take place. We here at Ananda, and inspired by the teachings of Yogananda and by our own founder, our direct disciple, Swami Kriyananda, are of the mind, and we are hardly exclusive in this, that America has a destiny to play in the world. And the affirmation of personal liberties and freedom and justice, etc., are something that has inspired millions of people far beyond our boundaries. And yet, in the century that followed independence, the 19th century, particularly after the Civil War, was an explosion of industrialization moving into the 20th century, sort of converting humans and dehumanizing life in the world of the factories and so forth. Such an ironic balance to the bursting inspiration of liberty and pursuit of happiness and so forth. We have in the 20th century such intelligent fools like Jean-Paul Sartre. He did a novel or whatever it was, a play maybe, I don't know. I don't even claim to have read that fool, but pardon me. I'm sure he's a wonderful person. On the famous story from Greek mythology of Greek history of Orestes. Orestes killed his mother, and so Sartre, depicted Orestes as declaring to the men of Athens that he had, and only he, had finally done one act unendorsed by human social mores, and therefore he was a free man. And then, of course, in our culture came the famous Ayn Rand, who stood for all of the same principles, intense rationalism, rejection of intuition, and so on and so forth. Basically, this concept of independence. All men are created equal. Well, that's obviously not true. If there was anything obviously not true, it's that. There are stupid people, and there are evil people, and of course there are all the rest of us. And so it is that obviously that's not truth on the surface. It may in fact be, indeed surely is, a truth beneath the surface of those differences which separate us. Self-realization, as Yogananda termed what we represent. What do we represent? We represent that this world is a manifestation of the divine Godhead, that we are all made in that image, as has been taught east and west down through the ages. And that our real persona is not the personality born of the body and the senses. And so this sense of independence, it's a wonderful way to start, is the independence of freedom of thought, freedom of action, freedom from gender stereotypes, and freedom from racial prejudices, and all of these freedoms through which we're working through, sometimes 2 steps forward, sometimes 1 step back. This is, of course, the path to freedom. But the actual freedom transcends all of these. And, was interesting. Those of you who attended Ananda's first worldwide town hall, what night was that? Thursday night, here in this room. Some of you, I'm sure, watched from home. We've announced the process whereby at our founding community in California, worldwide, we are coming together to build, at long last, a temple that will be based on this basic design, which in turn was based on the design we have at our center in Italy. In any case, we've announced and rolled out that the intention of Ananda Worldwide is to create a unifying symbol of the unity and oneness that we represent. Not exclusively, these are things that are shared in all great traditions by true saints and masters. Yes, of course, but it is certainly what we represent. During the many years of Ananda's history, only about 50 years, most of it, our founder, Swami Triyananda, was alive and constantly traveling and visiting, and he, more than anything, outwardly symbolized the teachings which we represented and lived them so perfectly. But he's gone now, and we have his successors, Swamis Jyotish and Devi, who were here recently and visit all the different centers as their time and travels permit, following in that role. But this temple now represents something more tangible for us in that way. And in that town hall, some of you maybe have learned for the first time that one of our members is a man whose spiritual name, Jairam, has been in prison for 26 years and is committed to prison in life for a murder he did not commit. Okay, one of those stories. He's in prison. He has none of the personal liberties that you and I possess. And yet he's racing towards transcendent freedom. He's disabused, as it were, of all the daily preoccupations that you and I have about insurance and retirement and health and all this stuff and work, all these things we have to deal with. He is free to pursue the transcendent path. Now, of all the millions, far too many, I'm told, who are imprisoned in our American system, he might be the only one. Maybe there's another one, I don't know. But, so yes, it's rare. Just as saints coming out of the Holocaust were rare, but it's possible. And so the liberty that we represent here at Ananda, the liberty that will truly free us, is the liberty from egotism. Think of poor Mark Twain. He was on the cusp of coming out of an earlier age in which concepts like original sin, so his mocking trial of humanity for all of our pettiness, which who can deny? I mean, think about it this way. We have, I don't know how you measure it, thousands of thoughts every day. Thousands. Most of them are so trivial as to be embarrassing. In fact, one time a person came to, where are you? Swami Sriyapetra, Yogananda's guru in India, and some rationalist, some scientist, materialist, and said something like, I don't believe in God, or whatever. And so, Sriyapetra says, so you haven't isolated God in your test tubes, eh? And no. And he says, well, I suggest this experiment. He said, you watch your thoughts intently for 24 hours. Well, okay, 18 hours. And then you'll know why God is not present. Because if we were to watch our thoughts with ruthless self-honesty, we would see how petty and trivial we really are. I won't say really, but as we are presently, you see. And so, yes, original sin. Why not? I mean, heck, we've all done it. And here we are again in another reincarnation, trying to thrash our way through it. Nothing wrong with it, but there is something deeper. And it's our home, like the prodigal son, to which we yearn at some point after the anguishing monotony of endless lifetimes of the roller coaster of happiness and failure, success, failure, happiness, sadness, having to die a million times, different forms of death and so forth. At some point, As Patanjali in the Sutra says, we wake up. Wake up. And he says, analyze your dreams. You wake up in the morning and you have some, I forget the dream I had, it was really goofy this morning. And you wake up and the dream is gone. And yet in the dream it's so real. Well, guess what? Yes. And so the dream that we participate, you know, John Clark was sitting there in Samadhi over in the back. Oh, sorry, I just stirred it, John. We had a wonderful class series there the last week or two. Not enough people came, but because you know, we're afraid to talk politics, like Mark Twain said. We're afraid to say it, but I'll tell you, you get a couple of people. Let's say if we were to talk about climate change, and I were to bring John up here, and he'd be the, what do you call that? The devil's advocate. A good term for John, I might add. We'd have a riot. We're so committed to opinions based on what we read or what we hear. We don't know nothing. I mean that. We have to live our life. But we are so conditioned by the opinions of the day. They might be right, but we wouldn't know. We might vote on the right side, but maybe not. So in our discussion, one of the topics that we did was we talked about what are the good points about the present administration in Washington. Forget the guy's name. And so we had a very interesting discussion about how the law of duality, the pendulum swinging between good and evil, can bring to us constant change. And how this imperfect world will never be perfect. Does that mean we retire? You know, Jesus said, the poor you shall have with ye always. Oh my God, did he really say that? Was he like a, pardon me, John Crozier, is a Republican? No, of course he wasn't. Anybody who studied the life of Jesus knows that. And so how do we balance the present state of, there's a beautiful movie that I don't recommend, because you have to have more courage than most do spiritually, but it's a movie about Padre Pio, a Catholic saint, a mystic, stigmatist of the wounds of Christ. And at one point, he turns to his friend and he whispers to him, it's all sin. It's all sin. And that's a very Catholic way of putting things. But what he really meant, from the standpoint of metaphysics, is it's all delusion. It's all change. It's all and so what he was really saying is that the kingdom of heaven lies within us. That the freedom that would bring us happiness, because really the bottom line of Yogananda's teachings, the first thing he wrote coming to America, was basically the science of happiness. And finally in our culture, studies are being conducted slowly, far too slowly, on what makes people happy. Generosity, kindness, consideration for other people. It's not that complicated. But we have this country of ours, founded on the pursuit of, well, they only said happiness, but we have translated largely into things like consumerism, exploitation, and I'll get mine first before you do. But nonetheless, happiness is the bottom line. Calmness, respect. But more than that, because goodness alone simply fluctuates back and forth. How calm and respectful, how would you be if you were trapped in a burning building or somebody hijacked your airplane? Would you be able to act wisely? Most people don't. Most people freeze or they panic. Studies have shown, and 9/11 too showed us that that's a fact. There are some who are in touch with something more. They don't have to be spiritually necessarily, because this is who we are. And they know just what to do. But those who meditate and offer themselves to the great flow of life, which is all life, which is life as one, whether we do so in more abstract metaphysical terms or more in devotional terms, as a disciple of a given path or guru, as it says in the reading, is less important than the openness to the reality that transcends the duality of the flux of this world. America was founded to trumpet the concept of freedom and independence. Spiritually, we haven't completely understood what that means, but for those with ears to hear and eyes to see, we know what the true meaning of freedom and independence is. Ananda is undertaking at this time, as many others are. Nothing we say here is exclusive to us. The Be the Change campaign, seeing that through the power of meditation, the daily practice of meditation, we can transform ourselves through the power of grace and our effort matched together, so that the shift of consciousness, without which all the other changes are but superficial, subject to the law of duality, can actually take place for the survival of the human race, not to mention a lot of other species and the earth itself. And this is the greatest contribution. It may be quiet, it may not be, hit the front pages, but this is where the real work of survival and prosperity and so forth exist. And Jesus said, "Seek ye the kingdom of heaven first, and all these things will be added unto you." In life, we are living examples of that, as have been such as us down through the ages. When you give your life to higher ideals, and live simply, live modestly within your means, and offer yourself through what the ego might say is self-sacrifice, to build temples of light, for example, to serve the great work of light, transcendence throughout the world in whatever way is meaningful for you, is to find happiness. It's actually and truly that simple. And that happiness is the freedom from the burden of egoity. And this is the necessary antidote to the ills of our age, which is an age of individuality, yes, but an age of ego affirmation. We need that golden rule, if you will, not as a thought, but as a realization, self-realization. So let us honor our country for what it represents. Yogananda said we have very good karma, despite what we did to the American Indians and Africans and so forth. Nonetheless, we do have good karma. And let's honor that and make it so by virtue of our commitment to make a change. Happy 4th of July.
I'd like to read to you Yogananda's words from Whispers from Eternity that Hriman selected. In the Temple of United Hearts, it befits not thy lily tender feet to dance on the stony soil of hard hearts. On the petals of my sympathy for others, may thy tenderness dance forever. Divine Mother, may I feel thy heart throbs in my own heart, thy joy in my happiness, thy wise direction in all my activities, thy spirit in my soul. Divine Mother, I lay the flowers of my love at thy feet of eternity. Oh, open wide the flowers of my budding devotion, and release thy fragrance, that it may spread from my soul to the souls of others, ever whispering of thee. At the heart of my whispered prayers, I feel stirring thy silent whispers. In the light of my burning candle of devotion, I behold at last thy sacred blaze of perfect love. O Divine Mother, unite our hearts as one heart, so that on the sacred altar of united hearts, we may find thine omnipresence enthroned forever. Amen.